Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Darkness. Gather round and try to stay in the light. Some of the others from the dark aren't quite as civil as I am, and I'd hate have to clean up the mess. Entity feeding on our negative energy, from Anonymous. This is a lengthy but 100% true story. About 10 years ago, my family and I, my wife and daughter, lived in the northeastern part of the United States for a few years. We were a little sick of the small apartment we were living in, and sick of how congested the town we lived in was. So when we decided to look for a new apartment or townhome to live in, we decided to search for something in a more remote location that would give our dog and kid room to run and play. We found a very small subdivision located in literally the middle of nowhere. It was one street that went far out into the woods and split off into 3 streets that housed nothing but side-by-side duplex-style townhomes. We thought we had found the perfect place for us. It was a 2-story place with a 2-car garage and a half-finished basement. On the first floor was a kitchen, a large living room with cathedral ceilings that went all the way to the top of the house, a little office-type room off the living room, and a bathroom. The second floor had 2 bedrooms, a Jack and Jill bathroom shared by the 2 bedrooms, and a little loft area that overlooked the living room. Additionally, our house backed right up on a large reserve of undeveloped woods. I mean, we had less than 10 feet from our back door to what seemed like never-ending trees. It was always very creepy at night. I never could confirm it, but neighbors had mentioned to us that the part of the undisturbed woods was an old Indian reserve, and that possibly this subdivision had been built on part of it. Looking on a map, I had always thought it was strange that the small subdivision was so secluded and built smack dab in the middle of these remote woods. Adding to the creepy factor of living here, the neighbors that were on the other side of our duplex were very, very strange people. They almost never left their home. They would come out, but never seemed to leave. They dressed very weird. Whenever we'd arrive home, they would just pop up out of nowhere and chit-chat with us about the strangest stuff. I always felt we had the crazy family from Texas Chainsaw Massacre living next to us. Anyway, we lived there for a handful of months, and absolutely loved it. But then, slowly, over time, my wife and I began to fight more and more. We were definitely living a strained relationship. We began to spend more time in separate rooms than we did together. One night, our daughter had gone to spend the night at her grandparents' house. My wife was watching TV in the living room, and I was watching TV in the little office off to the side of the living room. Out of nowhere, blaringly loud and coming from upstairs, we hear Disney music playing. As soon as the music started, my dog, who was a large breed and great as a watchdog, immediately got up and ran into his kennel. It was strange, but I thought nothing of it. I went into the living room, and both my wife and I are looking at each other puzzled. I slowly begin to make my way upstairs, and realize the music is coming from my daughter's room. The light is now on in her room, it hadn't been before, and her little princess music player in her room is blaring at the loudest setting. I go in and quickly turn it off. At first, I thought nothing strange was happening, but the more I looked at her music player, the more things felt creepy to me. Her music player was one that had a physical sliding on switch. Also, every time you turned it on, it defaulted to radio mode. To get the CD to play that had been blaring that night, someone would have had to gone in there, slide the switch to on, press CD to select the mode, and then press play to get the CD to start. Immediately upon realizing how impossible it was for all of that to accidentally happen, I had the immense feeling like something was in that room with me. I brushed it off, and we went on with our lives. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and our relationship was continuing to become more and more strained. My wife was going to bed by herself many nights, while I stayed up into the early morning hours watching TV. One morning, at about 3 a.m., I hear my wife coming down the stairs as fast as she can. She comes barging into the office room where I always watch TV, and with this terrified look on her face, she asked me if I was just upstairs. I tell her no, and that I've been downstairs watching TV all night. She begins to tell me about how she was putting our daughter to bed by reading her a bedtime story. My wife fell asleep in my daughter's bed. While she's in and out of sleep, she hears someone come upstairs and go into our bedroom. She just assumed it was me going to bed. Suddenly, while sleeping, she felt an incredible force pushing down on her chest and what felt like someone choking her throat. Obviously, it was very dark in the room with the lights out, since we lived in the middle of nowhere, but she said when she opened her eyes, she couldn't see or feel anyone there on top of her. Finally, when the force relented, she bolted out of the bed and turned on the lights. There was no one there other than our daughter, and she was sound asleep and completely undisturbed. We were beginning to feel like something else was happening in our house that was beyond just weird coincidences. We were starting to become very concerned that something dark and evil was in our home. Fast forward again a couple more weeks, and things are becoming more and more strained between us. The fighting is reaching its peak. One night, on what seemed like one of the very few nights we actually could get along, my wife and I were watching TV together in the living room. Keep in mind, above the living room was that overlooking loft area that we had turned into a computer area for my wife. While we are quietly watching TV, we hear a really loud thud come from the floor of the loft area. It sounded just as if a large man was standing on a chair and stepping down off of it. Then we heard the unmistakable sound of an adult-sized person walking through that loft area that was in between our upstairs bedroom and our daughter's room. We sat there staring at each other in total fear and disbelief. Finally, I jumped up and turned on the lights so I could see up there. Nothing. No one. I sprinted up the stairs as fast as possible. No one was there. I threw open our bedroom door. Nothing. I threw open our daughter's bedroom door. Nothing. She was sound asleep in bed. We were beyond terrified. We knew what we had heard. It sounded exactly like a large adult man walking around upstairs. We didn't know what to do or what to think. My wife couldn't handle it. The paranormal occurrences combined with our constant fighting, she felt like she had to move out. She felt like whatever was in our house came because it wanted to feed off our negative energy and was also forcing us to turn on each other so it could thrive and feed more. After taking a day or two to pack a few suitcases, she took our daughter and went to stay with her parents. I stayed in the house. I was hard-headed and still in denial. I refused to admit that something was occurring in our home. Exactly one day after they left, I was very stressed and upset with having to now live alone. I decided to go take a long, hot shower. Our bathroom was rather large. It was about 10 feet between the shower and the bathroom sinks and the counter. I've been in the shower for about 10 to 20 minutes now, just relaxing in the shower, and suddenly I see a large object slam into the shower curtain and hit the floor. If the shower curtain wasn't there, it would have hit me right in the face. Thinking someone was in the bathroom with me, I quickly pull open the shower curtain and see my hairbrush lying on the floor right next to the shower. It was one of those heavy-duty brushes made out of wood with bristles on it. With the sink being 10 feet away and the brush being so heavy, I knew there was no way it could just fall on the floor that far. Plus, I'm 6 feet tall. Nothing falls off the counter and hits 6 feet up. It was as if something was trying to harm me and hit me in the head with it. Had the shower curtain not been there, it would have. I was terrified. I felt like with my wife and daughter now gone and just me alone in the house, I was the only thing it could latch itself onto. Whatever entity was in that house with me was now trying to attack and eventually consume me. I knew I needed to get out of that house ASAP. I called my wife and told her what happened. She agreed that we needed to get away from that house, immediately. As soon as we could, we paid the money to break our rental agreement. We packed our stuff up, and we moved completely out of state and back to where I'm from. Our marriage isn't perfect now, as we still have our ups and downs, but things are so much better since leaving that place. I am certain that if we had never left there, that entity that was in the home with us would have done something terrible to us, or forced one of us to do something terrible to each other. I'm thankful every day that we left that place 10 years ago. I never did get to see the entity, but you could feel the heavy, evil presence it emitted in that home. I hope and pray I never encounter anything like that again. Creepy people followed me for 45 minutes after college. From Anonymous. This happened to me 3 years ago. I was in college, but I took night class because I was working full-time by day. That night, my class ended around 10 p.m. The school is a bit far away from my home. I could walk, but it was winter, and lots of snow had fallen that week. The walkways were full of snow. It would have taken me forever to walk home. My bus app told me I had just missed the bus, and the next one was 30 minutes away. When this happened, I would always walk to the nearest subway, because there was another bus stop, and instead of waiting and freezing, I would walk to warm myself up a little. So that is exactly what I did that night. The shortest way to the subway station was through a park. I always took that path and had no reason to worry that this night was going to be any different. Before arriving to the park entrance, I noticed there was a guy with a very recognizable hockey-themed winter hat, smoking near benches. As soon as he saw me, he picked up his things and slowly walked towards the walkway. I have no idea why, but I found him suspicious, and I remembered something my mom told me when I was a kid. When you feel like something is off about someone at night, find any reason you can to slow down and let him walk past you. You'd rather have someone in front of you than behind. For some reason, I thought he was weird and did just like my mom told me. I faked receiving a text and slowed down so he would be in front of me. He was so incredibly slow, as if he wanted me to get past him, but I would just slow down even more. He was vaping something that smelled like super fake strawberry. I was hoping he wouldn't go into the park, but he did. We walked like that in the park until I noticed there was a hockey game going on. I decided I would go and watch the match, just to let him take some distance before I keep going. As I was turning right to get to the outdoor ice rink, he turned left on a path that goes by a building. I was reassured that he wasn't going the same direction I needed to go. Still, I was a bit curious about the match, so I watched it for a minute or so, then turned back to go on my path. As I turned, my blood ran cold. The same guy that turned left was turning the other corner of the building. He just walked around the building. If I had kept going instead of watching the hockey game, he would have been behind me. I was petrified, but I was still relatively safe because there were people around. The guy walked slowly as ever in the direction I needed to go, but I did not follow him straight away. I waited for a bunch of students to walk by and walked behind them. Safety in numbers, I guess. He was waiting by the park exit, checking his phone. When he saw the bunch of students and he walked away, normal speed this time. I saw him turn right on a street, and I thought that was the end of it. Eventually, I reached the subway station and started waiting for the bus. And then, I smelled a very familiar, potent strawberry smell. As I turned to look around, there was the guy with the hockey theme hat and another guy, both staring at me. When the bus arrived, I was shaking, and it was not because of the cold. They both got in the bus with me and other passengers. I told the bus driver about what happened. Where I live, past 9 p.m., women can ask a bus driver to be dropped alone at a bus stop, making sure no one can follow her. And that is exactly what the bus driver did. I had the bright idea to get out one stop early, and I walked in the opposite direction from my home and waited for the bus to leave. I turned around to wave at the bus driver as a way of thanking him, and I saw the two guys banging on the middle door. The bus driver had locked them so they wouldn't open. I took that bus almost every night and I never saw those two guys, nor have I ever seen them around my house. But here they were banging on the door, and although I could not hear them, I could clearly see them yell at the bus driver. When the lights finally turned green and the bus left, I rushed back home faster than I ever did in the snow. The next night, after school, I was too nervous to use my shortcut through the park, so I took the long way around. I got to my bus safely, but what I saw on that ride scared the living hell out of me. At the bus stop that I had gotten off the previous day were two guys, one with a hockey-themed hat. They did not get on the bus. My first thought was that they were waiting for me and not the bus. Lucky for me, this was not my stop. Maybe I was paranoid, and all this was just a strange series of coincidences, but I was scared to get on that bus, and still am today. I moved in with my boyfriend since then, but the shortest way to our house is through the park. I still take the long way round at night. I grew up in a 110-year-old house. These are some of my unfortunate memories. From a Trouble 3R. It started when I was 8 years old, maybe before that, but I can't remember. It's unfortunate that I remember the things I'm going to recall in this. Whether it be the pots and pans rattling, the footsteps coming from upstairs that my grandmother told me were mice, or the general feeling of unease being in that house at night. I'm not going to say that it was pure terror and misery for the entire time that I lived there. Some days were pretty good, but it shaped my paranoia and taught me how to ignore things that would absolutely terrify a normal person. I refused to sleep upstairs in my room by myself, so my grandmother allowed me to sleep on the couch in the living room. My grandparents were weird. My grandfather slept in a bed in their bedroom, and my grandmother slept on a couch in the living room. I slept on the couch opposite hers. The house was really old, but my grandmother had some serious OCD, so it was nice, clean, and everything had a place, and there was a place for everything. I knew something was off with my grandmother from the beginning. She was so bitter and sometimes just plain cruel. I think my dad playing with a Ouija board in our house when he was young started everything. It told him the order him and his 2 friends were going to die, and they all died in that order. Whatever he let in that day affected me and my brother very intensely, and possibly possessed my grandmother and caused her hatred. The strange things only stopped happening after she died. Unfortunately for us, there was a lot to endure until that day finally came. I remember laying on that crap-colored brown couch in the dark, trying so hard to sleep. Then I would hear the pots and pans in the kitchen being rattled around. My grandmother knew I was going to say something about it, and like an automated message spoke up to say that it was Grandpa, but he was upstairs in his computer room. I would have heard him come down the stairs. It was not Grandpa. After they stopped, I would hear footsteps all night long in the room above us. Once again, like a machine that sensed my fear, she would say, "It's just mice. Go to sleep, goddammit." I was young, but I knew a mouse didn't weigh enough to have footfalls like that. So that was my early childhood there. Nothing too serious. But as I got older, things began to get more and more intense. I was 15 when I decided I was too old to be sleeping in the living room with my grandmother, and besides, I was sick to death of falling asleep to Golden Girls and the goddamn Lifetime channel. So I worked up the courage to brave the upstairs room that my dad had played with the Ouija board in. I arranged it nicely with a couch, bed, coffee table, and recliner, made it the hangout for me and my friends, and for a while, it was pretty sweet. But, like a hit of LSD, this nasty crap comes in waves. I'll never forget when the next one came crashing down on me and washed away any courage I had built up. Lying in my bed and watching Adult Swim, it was a Friday night and I usually stayed up pretty late. I had reached over to turn my light off and kick back and watch some Family Guy, followed by whatever other nonsense came on after, when I heard tap tap and tried to locate the surface that was being tapped on. It was my door frame, and through the fractal art tapestry I had hanging over the doorway, I could see the silhouette of someone who I assumed was my grandfather. But then it opened its eyes, and I saw the deep red crimson peering through the tapestry right at me. Frozen in complete and total fear, I knew then that what screwed with me in my younger years was back. And it was going to be much, much worse. I never wasted the time to tell anyone about this, because I knew it sounded insane. But it happened, and I thought about it all day the next day. When nightfall came, I retired back to my room, hoping in vain for a better night. I was sitting on my couch, playing my Xbox, and from outside my open window, I heard something whisper my name. But it didn't really sound like a voice right at the window, more like it was whispered from far away and carried through the wind into my ear. I immediately dropped my controller and felt sheer panic set in, knowing that nothing I could do would save me from this menacing force that was messing with my mental stability. I stood up and went to my grandfather's computer room and grabbed the Mossberg 12 gauge and brought it back to my room and sat there on my couch, waiting to pump slug after slug into whatever may come through that window that night. Nothing ever did. Even if it had, all the firearms in the world wouldn't have done me any good. Although it did on some levels make me feel safer. Not long after that, my dad was in the other room opposite me and yelled for me. I was slightly busy with something and just said, "What?" He replied, "Your stereo is turning up and down by itself." I just replied that it must be broken. Dad said, "No, the knob on the volume is moving on its own." As this was nothing new for me, I just dismissed it, and honestly didn't need any more creepy crap than I already dealt with. 15 minutes later, sadly, my father lay dead in my bathroom downstairs. He died in an apparent overdose. I tried like hell to save him. CPR was no match for what took him from this world. He had been acting strangely lately, making amends with people, apologies for things he did in the past. I think he knew it was coming. The Ouija board kept its promise and took my father last. Many more things happened in those times of my life. Nothing quite as bad as those 3 incidents, but it tapered off after my father died till I was 20. This is the last incident I will recount for the night, as my eyes are growing heavy and thinking about these times in my life makes me deeply uncomfortable. When I was 20, I was still in that same room, although a little rearranged. I had just finished watching a movie, and I had to piss so bad, like doing the pee-pee dance bad, but something inside me was begging me not to open that door and traverse the stairs to the bathroom. But what was I going to do? Piss my pants? I'm too old for that. So, against every bit of intuition, I went. When I got to the bottom of the stairs, the hair on my neck stood on end, and I instantly had chills run down my spine. I tried to ignore this and rounded the corner to the bathroom and shut the door. I finally relieved myself, and man, it was great. But when I turned around to place my hand on the doorknob, I had this ridiculous fear wash over me. I stood there, staring at the door for 15 minutes, scared to death of whatever was on the other side setting off my spidey senses. But just like not being able to piss myself, I couldn't really just sleep in the bathroom all night. So, I gripped the doorknob, turned it slowly, and prepared myself for what I could already feel. As I opened the door, I saw a massive, tall shadow move across my back porch, not touching the ground, but so tall that it bent onto my ceiling. As it traversed the porch and worked its way along the wall towards me, I finally broke past the fear-drive stupor that I was in and ran up the stairs. I swear I could feel it inches from grabbing my ankle and dragging me back down the stairs to my demise. I made the corner at the top of the stairs and ran into my room, and the door slammed hard behind me. I hadn't even touched it. I couldn't fall asleep till daylight that time. Believe it or not, these things really happened to me. These are actual memories that I wish I didn't have. But it was definitely nice to finally share with you all. I know some of you will believe me. Others will think I'm insane, but it happened, and I will never forget. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, don't forget to hit the like button, and subscribe if you want to hear more. If you have any suggestions for future videos, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. And if you would like to have your story narrated, you can send it to storiesofdarkness55@gmail.com. And as always, pleasant dreams.